section is addressing both of you guys. Here's even one layer deeper. Because, at the end of the day, how we decide to live our lives, how we calculate things through, on a really basic level, is arising from our worldview of what matters. What is life really about? It may sound unprofessional for me to talk about these more philosophical aspects, but think about it. Even the most tech bros that are the logical ones, the ones that are in the zeros and ones, even they, if you go down their rabbit holes and how they really operate, they're also, all of their decisions is coming from that deeper perception of what matters in life, their worldview. So it's always worth it to go on that level. And this is where I want to go with you right now. You see, to figure out what really matters in life, what is life about, you should really get curious about what is even consciousness, because this is how we perceive reality, right? This is what makes the real for us. Consciousness. You understand something, really what something is and what something is not, by exploring the edge cases of something, of a thing. For example, for consciousness, the edge of this topic is where near-death experiences happen, where consciousness is altered, for example, the psychedelic research that has been done. And when you go down that rabbit hole, really serious and renowned physicists, psychologists, and cognitive scientists are coming, same thing that...
And then that gives a lot of people hope, but usually that means it's an hour or 23 hours till the person's going to die. We can't explain that. How can a brain that's irreversibly damaged suddenly function completely normally? There is no explanation for that. With the near-death experiences, I was particularly compelled by 3 stories. And then there's one story that Dr. Bruce Grayson told me. He's a professor of psychiatry at University of Virginia, who has done 50 years of research into near-death experiences. And he told me the story of a patient in ICU who kept going into cardiac arrest. And he had a primary nurse who was a young 20-year-old nurse, and they had a really close bond. And one weekend, she had time off for the weekend, and he had a different nurse looking after him. And he went into cardiac arrest, and he had a near-death experience. And in that near-death experience, he saw his primary nurse. She said to him, "Your life isn't over. You have to go back and get better. And please tell my parents I'm sorry about the red MG." So he wakes up in ICU. He's got this replacement nurse looking after him. And he says, the strangest thing just happened. I had this experience of being in this other world. I saw my primary nurse, and she said I had to come back. And she also said, tell my parents sorry about the red MG. So the temporary nurse bursts into tears, runs out of the room. He has no idea why. Someone comes in and says, what's just happened? He explains, and they tell him that his primary nurse was given a red MG for her 21st birthday, took it out for a test run, crashed it into a tree, and died. Now, he didn't know she was dead, but he saw her on the other side, and she told him to come back.
What is it that you believe, based on those near-death experiences, like the red MG story, and based on this phenomenon of terminal lucidity?
So Professor Alexander Bathiani, who wrote Threshold about terminal lucidity, put it really nicely when he said, maybe at the border of life and death, we see something that is true all along, but we don't, for whatever reason, see it or acknowledge it whilst we're alive and well, which is that the mind and body can operate independently of each other.
It is quite shocking. There's this case from 2009, an 82-year-old woman with Alzheimer's disease who was nonverbal and non-responsive and had no apparent recognition of her surroundings or families for years. And then one day before her death, she suddenly sat up in hospital, looked around and recognized her daughter by name, spoke clearly, reminisced about the past, thanked her family for caring for her. Her speech was coherent, her memory was intact, and her personality recognizable, as though she had never been ill. She fell asleep that evening and died peacefully during the night.
Room later from the anesthesia, and before anybody can talk to her, even though she has a trachea tube in her mouth still, She motions for them to say nothing and for a napkin. And she writes on the napkin, I know my heart stopped. I know my uterus is out because they did a hysterectomy, and I know I have a baby girl, so that she could tell them before they could tell her exactly what happened. And she said, from that moment, she knew that consciousness was fundamental, that she was not just this physical body. And she had been an atheist ahead of time, but that experience now told her, I'm much more than my five senses and the neurons in my brain.
We are consciousness having a human experience, not the other way around. This whole reality we are seeing around us is a game, okay? It's a simulation. And the only reason we are here is to experience, to be alive, to add to life. A really meaningful life is when we take possibilities and turn them into something concrete, to reality. This is what makes a life interesting and meaningful. When enough people stop remembering what life is really about, we stagnate. Imagination stagnates. And this is the death of life itself, when imagination stagnates, when we don't even think of new possibilities and actually try to make them happen together, life itself becomes meaningless. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I can create a video to go there. Because at the end of the day, this is really what we make all of our decisions. What matters in life, what doesn't matter in life, really comes from this worldview level of things, this meta level of things, this philosophical level of things. I think it's worth creating a video around that because it frees us from a lot of things that we think matter but doesn't. You know, it frees us from that life that we end up being on our deathbeds and we look back on our lives and say, what was it? I just performed my whole life and I don't even know who I really was. And this is a really tragic moment that I hope we can avoid in our lives. You see, there are two ways to move through life, basically. You can optimize for being right. So the maximizing for the amount of times in your life that you were right. For making the safe assessments, for never being the person who did something dumb or did something that did not work. Or you can optimize for the amount of times that you were alive. For following a certain curiosity you deep down have. A curiosity that really pulls you to being curious about what's on the other side rather than afraid of it. And you see, when we optimize towards just being right, what does it mean? So to always be right is to never take risks, is to never do the risky thing of being curious about something that others don't understand, but you understand and you just follow it. From very early ages, we've been trained and we've been conditioned to optimize for being right. Think about it, the standardized tests, and thing be rewarded, do the expected thing, be rewarded. All these things have installed a certain calculator in our minds that we need to become aware of. Of course, you need to find the right balance between these two. But at the end of the day, if you're optimizing towards being more alive, you have to risk things. You have to make a clown of yourself sometimes. Because you're genuinely curious to figure something out, you know? And we sometimes take life too seriously. I think it was Einstein, I don't know who exactly it was. It said, we humans take life that God had created for fun too seriously. Kind of along those lines. We're here to play. The nature of life is, as one of the comments said, is full of sorrow and pain. And the beauty and meaning of life is how to reduce that pain for ourselves and others by creating new things. By opening up new possibilities. This is what really life is about. So by that definition, we are not even living. We're too obsessed with the wrong things. And when you know that about my worldview, you understand why I'm so okay with making mistakes and I stand up again, because it's part of life. It's okay. Life, again, is full of sorrow, and it's really about dealing with sorrow and pain. So the question becomes, what is a meaningful pain? What is a meaningful suffering? It would be hard to get to, but the suffering on the path is a meaningful suffering. So if life is anyways a series of suffering and sorrow, at least let's have agency over the kind of suffering we go through. Now I will go to the next comment. My answer specifically to what you said. Again, the same rule here. It may look like I'm attacking you. I'm not. I'm really on the same side. Something deep within you urged you to write this comment. Recognize that 0.001% about the nature of reality and everything. Put that aside for a second. I think the whole comment of you comes down to this. You're so mad of why the evil powers have so much power over our lives, okay? So let's go deeper on what powers exist, how it works, okay? There's 4 types of power. I've listed it here. On one side is power over, and then power, the rest of the 3 are on the other side. Now, imagine the bucket of amount of power units it exists in reality is a set number, is set. Just like energy that doesn't get more or less, it just shifts in form. It's the same with power. At any given time, these power units that, let's say, they're nameless and stateless, they're within one of these 2 buckets, either power over or power within and power with. There are certain people in the world that they thrive on that power over others. The reason this power over, like these evil energies that you say is controlling everything in our lives, have so much power right now is because a lot of us are giving away that unit of power that we had. And when you give it away, it automatically goes to the other team, which is the team of power over, people that you're describing. And the problem is, on the other hand, the power within is the foundation for power with. So if you do not feel empowered within yourself, you do not engage also in activities that increases the power with, which is a collective, which is a community level power. So their strategy to keep being in power and to increase their power, which is their power over kind, is to keep you in this power, to bring you in this powerless situation. And when they do that, they will also automatically block any power with to happen, because power within is the first step. Notice what's happening here. I am inviting you into the power with dynamic to build something that increases our collective power. But I'm noticing if people do not choose to believe in their power within aspect, they're not going to believe that something is possible to even engage with it. So my power, my level of power, because I have already chose my side, I'm not interested in this power over on their side. I am interested on this level of power. Because I've already chosen my side, now I have to play by the dynamics of the side I chose. So my level of power depends on you stepping up to your power. Because without you and enough of people like yourself stepping up to their power, we cannot even come to the power with level. You understand? So your business is my business too. And that blockage that is stopping you from stepping up to your power is also my problem too. Because I have decided on the kind of power I'm interested to be a part of accumulating. This is like centralized power and decentralized power. This is kind of like the same thing. I will not even go to the details of everything you said, okay? But I will tell you one thing. You know, when at some point of our lives, something disappoints us, or we didn't feel or we didn't have enough power to sustain that pain, felt like there's no one to pick us up, it's too much to endure alone. We end up creating a coping mechanism because the pain was so deep and so hard to endure. We come out of that experience saying, I will never experience that pain ever again. And the only way to avoid this pain to ever be experienced again is to never even have a hopeful state ever in your life again. So this is what we do. When we hold on to that pain and we want to try so hard not to experience that pain ever again, we hold ourselves in a constant level of pain just to avoid ever feeling that getting disappointed again moment in our lives. And this forever will control our lives if we're not aware of it. You see the same pattern, for example, in this dynamic that men and women are having these days too. Like men that go against women or start to hate women altogether, they're like that. They have been in an experience where they were really in love and they really loved someone, and that unexpected disappointment happened, and they said, I will never experience that again, and they go against the whole woman base, that they go against everyone, every woman. They are all gold diggers, they're all this, they're all deceptive, you know. And not just for men, for women also. All men are bad, they're all cheaters, they're all this, they're all that. So they think that they are going against this evil, but all they're doing, they're making their own lives miserable by this view that they hold about life. They're keeping themselves in constant pain forever just by adopting that worldview. I'm not going into the details of everything you wrote, even though I could, because it doesn't serve you. The real thing that needs to be addressed is this. So it's a decision of, do you want to be in constant pain every single day forever because of this cynicism? Recognize that you're keeping yourself in constant hell because of these thoughts is doing a very big disservice to you and your life path right now. You are blocking your own way to ever feeling happy or ever feeling any joy in your life because you're afraid of that moment of disappointment to ever encounter you again. And I'm not in this bigger enlightened person that knows better. No, I'm a human too. Like after the startup show for a whole week, was my self-talk. This is how I talk to myself. Sentences that you use, they really resonates with me. The way you talked, I recognized it in myself too. So for a whole week, I was very I was talking like this, everyone's stupid, everyone is this, what do you think, who do you think you are, whatever, I was like in this constant negativity, and I was very disappointed, and I was like, I will never feel disappointed again. So I was dragging myself down into this lowest version of that I can ever get, so that I never dare to ever try anything again, so that I never be disappointed like this again. And I asked myself, do I want to adopt that life for you? No. I would rather to be disappointed many, many more times just for those moments of happiness and joy that I really purely want to feel them. I don't want to numb myself down. I think it also reminds me of how I've heard something in the sense of the way that the drugs that help certain mental disorder is to completely numb every emotion that they ever have. I don't remember which mental disorder it was, but definitely I know that the way that the drugs work, that they flatten everything to avoid that negative emotion to happen. They flatten everything, so this person absolutely is numbed to every emotion. I've been through some painful situations in my life, for sure, and the way you should think about pain and disappointment is just, instead of thinking of it as a lake within you that you just hold on to forever, think of it as a river. You just let it go through you and then let it go. Don't hold on to it. Now, I'm not in this bigger position trying to tell you what to do. I'm just telling how I deal with these situations. If this whole life is nothing but a simulation or whatever, why living it so bitter? All I'm saying, don't do that to yourself. Open up to possibilities again. Open up to joy and happiness again. Yes, and when you do it, I warn you, there are going to be disappointing moments again. But this is what life is about. Ups and lows. So don't flatten your life just to avoid that pain. You can't deal with it. And when you end up having a community, which we're building, they're going to also hold you when you're down again. So let's build those safety nets that we need to deal with those disappointments, those healing mechanisms, which I believe they're all community-based. So we keep creating solutions to help people be alone in their misery. Just like this anxiety solution, they're creating dolls, freaking pillows to solve your loneliness and anxiety. Real way of dealing with these things is healing with being with the right people and community. I'm not above you or below you. I'm just saying I resonate with your feeling because I've had that quite recently, actually. But I hope you don't hold on to it. Don't. But reflect on it. Okay, seriously.
And the point is that they know that these people who had cardiac arrest, which lasted more than, I think it's about 20 seconds, had flat EEG, which means the whole cortex of the brain is silent. And they found that about somewhere between 18 and 20% of those people in one study by Pim van Lommel in the Netherlands had an NDE, and about 12% had what they call a core NDE, meaning that they left their bodies and often experienced things outside of the room they were in, et cetera. And again, flat EEG, cardiac arrest. And what I want to do right now is say that, first of all, we have the evidence from these prospective studies that say, yes, this exists. And yes, the people see things that they couldn't see with their five senses from outside her physical body with her eyes taped shut. Pam Reynolds says she also remembered hearing a female voice saying that her veins and arteries were small. And in fact, while Spessler operated on Pam's head, a female surgeon located the femoral artery and vein in Reynolds' right groin, and they did turn out to be too small. And so the left artery was used. So they then did that hypothermia procedure. So once her heart stopped, Reynolds' brain waves flattened into their electrocerebral silence, and her brainstem function weakened, and clicks from that ear device that was clicking into her ear produced more and more lower spikes on the monitoring electrogram of her midbrain, or excuse me, her brainstem function. So she was now in total brain shutdown, and that was the time for their daring surgical maneuver to begin. And in this period, her near-death experience progressed. And now she said there was a sensation like being pulled almost out of her body, but not against her will, she said. She said, I was going of my own accord because I wanted to go. And the feeling like I was going up this elevator really fast, like almost in a tunnel, but not a tunnel. And there she ended up meeting her grandmother and a number of her relatives. And her family told her, it's not your time. You cannot go any further. You need to go back. And she said, then I saw my body back in the surgical room. And she said, I didn't want to get into it. It looked terrible. It looked like a train wreck. It looked like what it was about how it could have happened. Heard the bone saw with her eyes and her ears taped shut and with loudspeakers in her ears. And when he was asked how he could explain Reynolds' perceptions of the events of her surgery, Spessler said, from a scientific perspective, I have absolutely no explanation about how it could have happened. He was then asked whether the drugs or the neurotransmitters could create hallucinations. And Spessler said, those are suspect, but not in this setting. You can have patients who become hypoxic, who have too little oxygen in the blood. But in that situations, patients may experience hallucinations where you see yourself transported up into a corner of the ceiling and you're looking down on things. But in virtually every one of those settings, you have a warm body which is missing something, so that you can imagine all sorts of neurons firing in an unorganized fashion, and it would give you an explanation. But here you have the opposite. Here you have the neuron in the depth of a sleepy state of suspended animation, and that makes it very hard to think that it's from active neural transmission. So when I heard that case, it was like, really? How could I, as a neuroscientist, find a reason to say that this couldn't have actually been a Stephanie Arnold about her own near-death experience during cardiac arrest during the birth of her second child from amniotic fluid embolism that happened to her. And what was interesting about this case was that she had no memories of a near-death experience right after her resuscitation, but she recovered her memories of the NDE only later after she was under hypnosis. And then when she shared the recordings of the hypnosis sessions with her hospital staff, her husband, and the other caregivers, they verified everything she said. And I think that's important because recent prospective studies, like those of Pim van Lommel, only do see these NDEs in maybe somewhere between 18 and 20% of cases, depending on the study. But as you say, some people then say, well, wait a minute, how can it be real if people don't have this all the time? And what's interesting is that the well-known MD Sam Parnia said, why would it happen in only, say, 18% of the cases? And he proposes that these percentages may be low, not because they don't occur in more individuals, but because patients had retained no memory of the event. And he states that that possibility really raises the issue of experiences in relation to death being much more common than we've previously estimated, with some individuals being aware during cardiac arrest but having forgotten the experiences until later they try to attempt to recall the events. Most people can't, but now studies are showing that under hypnosis, these memories have this new tool for coming now to the surface. I like his phrase. He says, basically that these enhanced methods may permit access to a larger iceberg of memories outside the range of those normally attainable through explicit recall. So to me, it's like, oh, wow. I certainly am aware that that happens because we know in our dreams, the dreams are happening in absolute, like clear color. And as soon as we wake up, they're gone. And no matter what I do, I can't remember them. So in fact, I think there is research showing that we remember best events that happen in a particular state of consciousness when we go back to that state of consciousness. And that's sort of what you're doing in hypnosis. You're going back to this quiet brain where you were in the NDE, and then that memory can come back. And I just want to mention to you in this case of Stephanie Arnold that I published a paper after doing an interview with her. And I know that Robert Mays and others have also looked at her case carefully. And there are 14 separate events that happened during her cardiac arrest that were later verified by hospital personnel when she actually recovered these memories during this hypnotherapy. And I'll just name a few of them for you so you get a feeling of what she actually had verified. So one of them was that she saw another doctor who was not her own doctor, who was named Dr. Levitt, delivering her son Jacob. And she was wondering, why isn't Dr. Levitt delivering my son Jacob? Well, when she mentioned this, Dr. Park, the resident who delivered her son Jacob, confirmed that she had delivered him. And they said that's typical in a teaching hospital. You allow the residents to go ahead and do some of the parts of a procedure. Another was Arnold saw another doctor, again, this is a Dr. Lim in the operating room, standing next to the EKG, though she was not scheduled to be in the operation. And again, Dr. Lim confirmed that at the last minute, she decided to attend Arnold's delivery. So all these things were seen with her eyes taped shut, again, under cardiac arrest. She says she also saw a brunette nurse push the code button when she had cardiac arrest. And Dr. Higgins verified that it was this brunette nurse that did that. Arnold saw Dr. Higgins put a tube down her throat to get her breathing back, and Higgins confirmed that it was the one that intubated Arnold. And she also saw one of the nurses who was very big and strong starting compressions, and she recognized her a year later when she met her for the first time and said, "You were the one that broke my ribs during the compressions." And the nurse, Jessica, confirmed that that was the case. So I heard those particular events and the fact that they were all corroborated when the hospital staff saw the recording of the hypnotherapy session. And they said, you were explaining everything exactly as it happened. We're looking up, for example, a keyword like near-death experiences, and they would find that and then see the evidence that is there. Again, she had her eyes taped shut, and yet at a certain point, she, of course, hears the surgeon say, basically, well, no, it's the anesthesiologist say her blood pressure is too low. How far along are you in the surgery to the surgeon? And he basically says her blood pressure is plummeting fast. And at that point, she hears a loud expletive because, in fact, her blood pressure has plummeted, and they then go ahead and press that red button to call a code into the wall because her heart has stopped. And she then is watching all of this now from above her body in the operating room, seeing everything in the operating room. She then leaves for a period of time and goes, she says, she realizes it's not another realm. It's another state of consciousness that she is in, where she feels one with this sparkling like intelligence. And she feels totally happy there, but then is told, you have to go back. She goes back, enters the operating room, and sees the code team rushing into the room, trying to revive her. And then this white-haired surgeon coming in, weaving his way through the room to her side, taking his hand, reaching into her blood-filled abdomen, locating the aorta, clamping his finger around it, clamping it shut. And that's when her heart stops pumping again. And she knows that she's going to live because she's watching all of this happening. And she then again hears a nurse whisper in her ear that you have a baby that's a beautiful little girl. She survived. She wakes up in the recovery room later from the anesthesia. And before anybody can talk to her, even though she has a trachea tube in her mouth still, she motions for them to say nothing and for a napkin. And she writes on the napkin, "I know my heart stopped. I know my uterus is out because they did a hysterectomy, and I know I have a baby girl, so that she could tell them before they could tell her exactly what happened. And she said, from that moment, she knew that consciousness was fundamental, that she was not just this physical body. And she had been an atheist ahead of time, but that experience now told her, I'm much more than my five senses and the neurons in my brain. And Natalia, I want to mention one more thing. When you hear about a number of scientists who have actually been Nobel Prize winners or close to that, talking about how they made a scientific discovery, often it came to them in a dream. So, once again, it's not as if it's only the intellect and its linear rational portion of our brain that is functioning to create these great insights. It is often this other part of ourselves that comes when the mind is quiet. And then in the dream, the answer comes. And then in the morning, we write it down and we do the experiment and it's true. This just reminds me, when I look at the fundamental aspects of what I would call consciousness being fundamental, they include things like not only it's causal, physical reality, of course, is its manifestation, but all conscious entities are linked or entangled. And as a neuroscientist, I couldn't accept that. But the more I look at research coming out today, the more evidence there is for that. And I want to give you just one quick example because I just learned about it. It's research that has been done by Diane Hennessy Powell, a neuropsychiatrist, on children with autism who usually cannot speak. And they are now being given tests to show that they have almost 100% mental telepathy with their mothers who they are emotionally linked to. And she's done this experiment with many of these children. She will put the child in a room and the mother across from the room so the child can't see even like words the mother is looking at or a book, and simply has the mother look at, for example, a picture on a book, and the child will tell you what the picture is. And they can do this if the mother's in another room. There's no way they can be communicating at a verbal three senses level. And yet these children again and again are absolutely active. And so they developed telepathy, the ability to mentally know what another person is seeing or thinking.
So, if it's bullshit, it will be found to be bullshit. But don't say there is bullshit just because you don't want to even think about it. And that's the problem today. People, the first time they hear the wrong word from them, they shut off and they don't even want to think about it.
The biggest learning of my life was that this company, IBM, that I joined, 3 years later, I was the account manager, or the sales manager, if you want, of the education sector. And that year, my country, Egypt, had a massive earthquake that destroyed a majority of the schools of Egypt. And so Egypt was given a lot of funds and a lot of resources to rebuild the schools, but they asked that those redesigns be done on CAD systems, GIS systems, and so on. And so I was a very good salesman. I walked in and I convinced the Ministry of Education to buy $4 million worth of IBM equipment. It was the second largest deal of the year. 6 weeks later, I realized that around 2/3 of that is not going to work, and accordingly, around 2/3 of Egyptian students are not going to go to school. And I couldn't sleep at night. I genuinely couldn't. I went back at 7 a.m., sat in front of the Minister of Education's office, and I wanted a meeting. By 8 p.m., when he finally was walking out, I said, "Your Excellency, I really have something to tell you. You need to cancel my order." And he thought I was mad, right? But he did. The next day, we had a committee. We canceled 2/3 of the order. I went back to my boss expecting to be fired. He supported me. And then 3 weeks later, the minister called me and said, "I have another technology request. What of this can IBM offer?" And I said, this, and that. The next morning, I kid you not, I had a $16 million order, direct order. And I realized something incredible, that when you try to benefit yourself in this world, life goes like, yeah, game on, fight me. When you try to benefit life, life goes like, I have your back. I'm going to do the work for you. And I promise you, that was the story of my career. Anytime I tried to make a difference in life, I didn't have to fight at all. The right people showed up at the right time with the right funds, with the right ideas, and it worked. every single time. It's hard to think because sometimes you think that everything has to be difficult. But it has to be difficult if you're against the mainstream of life, and life wants benefit for all beings. So please, do the test of ethics on everything that you build. If you don't want your loved ones to be at the receiving end of something you're building or investing in or thinking about or promoting, please don't do that. Please. And the opposite is also true. Invest in what makes a difference. Because when you look back at life from where I stand now, trust me, one more car doesn't make any difference at all. What makes a difference is what you actually did for life, for others, and so on.